Hi, this is Hannah from Yarnbox, and today I'm going to show you 5 of my favorite cast-ons. The first thing you're going to do is grab your wool yarn. Wool is the best for learning a new cast-on since it's a little bit stretchy, and a pair of needles. I like to use wooden needles because they don't let the yarn slide off the end as easily. The first cast-on I'm going to teach you is the first cast-on that I learned. You're going to start by making a slip knot, which is essentially just a loop, which you pinch at the X and grab the yarn through. You're going to tighten this slip knot around your needle, and we're going to cast on 10 stitches. For this cast on as a kid, I learned a little rhyme. It goes under the fence, where you go under the bar of the stitch, around the sheep, where you wrap your yarn around the needle, bring him through, where you come through the hole at the bottom and pull the two apart, and off he leaps, where you slide it on to the other needle or off the needle entirely. In this case, the off he leaps means putting it on the left needle to form your second stitch. Now I'm going to do it again with the rhyme so that you can see how it works. Under the fence, around the sheep, bring him through, and off he leaps. I'm going to cast on 10 stitches. When you pull your yarn tight after each stitch, don't pull too tight or you won't be able to get into the next stitch. When you knit the next row, you're still going to use the same rhyme. Under the fence, around the sheep, bring him through, and off he leaps. You'll notice that as you're knitting, your previous row, your cast-on row, forms this little chain. This chain is not very flexible, so I wouldn't recommend it for anything that you need a lot of stretch on, like hat or mittens. But it would be good for blanket edgings, toys, or a side-to-side knit garment where you want to have a really good edge to seam against. You'll also notice that this cast-on makes an edge that's kind of obvious on the fabric. You can see it start to form here where you can see all the little bumps. If you want more of an invisible edge, this is not really the cast-on for you. The next cast-on I'm going to show you is called the backwards loop cast-on. This cast-on also starts with a slip knot, or in some cases, it may already start with stitches already on your needle, as if you were going to start for a buttonhole that you've just bound off. The first step of this cast-on is to take your 2 fingers and turn them around so that you have a loop around your fingers. Then you're just going to insert your needle through the bar of that loop and pull tight. This is a really easy cast-on, but it's also a really tight cast-on, and it's incredibly inflexible. It's best for buttonholes or the edges of something that you really don't want to move. When we begin knitting this cast-on, you'll see that it does form an edge that butts up right against the edge of the fabric, so you don't have much of an edging. This is part of why it's so amazing for buttonholes, since it doesn't get stretched out and it's not incredibly obvious. It gives the look of a really clean edge. The next cast-on that I'm going to show you is a modified longtail cast-on called the twisted longtail. So you're going to start with a length of yarn that'll be your longtail, and you're going to hold your fingers just like you do for a regular longtail cast-on. If you're not familiar with the longtail cast-on, you might want to familiarize yourself with it before attempting this. There are lots of videos for it online. When you start this cast-on, you can bring the needle up through and touch it with your finger. And just make your first stitch the way that you always would for a long tail. So you've got 2 stitches. Then when you get ready to do the second stitch, you're going to twist the strand before you open it up and bring it over the needle. So you see how I've got the X here. I'm going to pinch that X and rotate my thumb and then make the stitch. Just like your regular long tail cast on, this has a really nice edging, but it's also a little bit stretchier than your standard long tail. This is probably my favorite cast on for socks, since it allows a lot of extra stretch with a really clean edge. I'll show you how some of that edge works up. And you can see it has just a very neat and tidy edge to the fabric. Now I'm going to show you a little bit of a trickier cast on. Isolde has a really good video on this Italian tubular cast on. So don't feel too intimidated if I go too fast. You can always look up Isolde's video and look at it a little closer. You're going to go ahead and start how you would for a normal cast on, but this is a ribbed long tail. So when you work it for mittens or the edging of a hat, your cast on is essentially going to disappear. This is the purl stitch, which you can tell because it has a bar, and this side of the yarn is going towards the front. See how it's under? And this is the knit stitch, which you can tell because it forms what looks like a knit stitch on this side. And you're just going to alternate the 2 to form your edging. So you go under, over, under both, under, over, under both, across the row. I have trouble with this one in the round, so sometimes what's a good idea is for you to knit your first row flat and then join in the round by knitting the first and last stitch together. You can see that on this side, all the stitches look kind of messy. But remember that we just did a purl stitch from the opposite side, so that first stitch is supposed to be a knit. And then you would just knit your ribbing across the edge. At first it's going to look a little bit lumpy because it has all of the different stitches built into the cast on. But as it starts to develop further, you're going to notice that there are definite knit and purl stitches to every side. This is an incredibly stretchy cast on and forms a nice thick brim edge. It's really perfect for accessory pieces. You'll notice that this last stitch has a little bit of a loop around that. That will go away as you continue to knit your rows. Also, when you join in the round on the next row, you'll be adding a little bit less stretch to this stitch when you knit 2 together, so we'll take care of that. The last cast on I'm going to show you is the Chinese Waitress cast on. You're going to start with a slip knot, just like any other regular cast on. But then it gets a little different. She has a lot of extra steps in the original Chinese Waitress cast on that I didn't find necessary for using this cast on. I still got a perfectly fine and very similar edge without all the extra work. What you're going to do is just cross your needles in the back, and you're going to wrap the yarn over, around, and down in between, and then pull your stitch through the center of both of those needles. It might remind you a little bit of a cable cast on if that's a cast on you're familiar with. At this point you have 1, 2, 3 stitches. So what you're going to do is wrap around, around, and down and bring it through again, and you'll notice that you have 2 stitches on this needle. At this point you're going to take this stitch and bring it over the newest stitch and off the end of the needle, almost like you're binding it off. That sets you up for the next stitch, at which case you can wrap around, around, and down and bring it back through. You just continue to do this all the way down, binding off those stitches as you come to them. It does add a stitch every time. You'll notice that I'm increasing without moving stitches around really. You'll notice that this cast on forms very loose looking stitches along this edge. I found when I knit through the stitches the regular way for that first row, it looked really loose, so I began knitting through the back loop when I went back through all of these stitches for the first cast on row. This is stretchier than a buttonhole bind off, so if you're working with a buttonhole that's a little smaller than your button, this might be a good option. I also like the idea of using it for the neckline of a sweater so that the sweater itself is stretchy enough to get over your head, but not so stretchy that you lose the edging of your sweater or that it pulls out of shape. So those are my 5 favorite cast-ons. I hope that you'll have fun learning them, and I'm going to put some links on how to do them from the original videos in the notes below. Take a look and let me know if you use any for your projects. Tell me on Facebook, Ravelry, or Twitter. See you around.